Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we're going to take a look around the NFC. Compared to the offseason, do we think the Eagles have a better chance or worse at moving up this conference in the regular season and in the playoffs? We'll get into it coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Louis DiBiase joined here, as always, by Gino Camilleri. And we're brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. Guaranteed win or lose. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. The Eagles are on a bye week, so no game to get you ready for on Sunday. Eagles-Browns returns to the link on Sunday of next week, trying to get to 3-2 in the year. The Eagles 2-2, and Gino, again, we've been kind of zoomed out for the last week, really looking at big picture stuff. Is Nick Sirianni the right coach long-term for this football team? How much blame do Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie deserve? Do they need to change their philosophical mindset and strategy when it comes to head coach, quarterback? Like, how do we save Jalen Hurts from suffering the same fate as Carson Wentz? It's been a lot of like big picture talk, but let's kind of zoom back in on the 2024 season, because the Eagles are just 2-2. They have a pretty favorable stretch, I'd want to say, on paper with their schedule the next 4 to 5 weeks. A.J. Brown should be back against Cleveland. Hopefully same for Devontae Smith and Lane Johnson. Those are 3 elite stars that you're getting back to a struggling offense. This team still very much has a chance to turn things around this year, win the division, do damage in the playoffs. And when you look at the NFC, my personal opinion is there's more teams there's a lot better teams in this conference, more solid teams than I thought there were in the offseason. But compared to my offseason take, I think there are less like clear juggernauts. I don't know if, at least through 4 games, there's one obvious team that I'm saying, oh yeah, like they're obviously in a tier of their own. They're a Super Bowl contender that maybe even the Eagles can't get through. I think there's a lot of good teams, but I'm still asking myself, like, who are the great teams in this conference, if there are any? So I think that's a good sign for an inconsistent Eagles team that has talent.
I think that's probably the entire takeaway so far through the first quarter of the season is who is the dominant team.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you say that about the whole NFL?
100%. Even Minnesota, in the games that they've played, they're 4-0, right? Are they like world beaters? Like,
and
are
do you
they
believe that's going to
unbeatable?
last, even if they have been like the clear best team? Do we trust Minnesota is going to do this all year long?
That I don't know.
Sold.
Yeah, I'm not sold on really anybody at this current point in time. You look at the Buffalo Bills across the pond, all of a sudden they get beat by the Baltimore Ravens, who they weren't looking good. Kansas City doesn't look great. Cincinnati, a team that a lot of people were high on. Hey, they're not doing so great either. So when you zoom back into this season in a nutshell, Lou, you're far from long gone when it comes to being in the playoff race, when it comes to competing with teams around the NFC. I would say right now, Lou, the one team I'm worried about in the NFC that I think is getting slept on, that Seattle team is pretty damn good out west.
I agree.
Man. I think they're just
them to make
steady.
The playoffs in August.
I think the Niners, they're going to come back healthy too. They have a bunch of injuries as well. Like, we know that they're going to be a team to compete with. Green Bay, you kind of saw exactly what you were going to get. The NFC South is much better than what people expected.
Yeah, what a game last night, man.
Goodness gracious, man. Kirk Cousins goes for over 500 yards. Like, who are the great teams? That's the question. It's everybody can beat anybody, and that might be the biggest talking point about why you have to have optimism for the rest of the year. Nobody is unbeatable at this current point in time outside of right now Minnesota, and we'll see how long that lasts. I mean, Sam Darnold playing way better than we expected. Kevin O'Connell's got his quarterback with inside a nice system to really make things work. Flores he's playing all the hits, but is that roster talented enough to last that long? And that's the thing. Who is the dominant team? I don't see a Georgia. I don't see an Alabama. I don't know who it is in the NFL this year.
But there's a lot of really good teams that I think some didn't expect to be as good.
The average is way higher than I think.
Yes. And you look at like Minnesota. Nobody thought they were going to be this good. I predicted Seattle to make the playoffs this year, but I didn't expect them to start 3-0 and Geno Smith to look like, again, one of the most underrated quarterbacks in football, and their defense to be this good. The Washington Commanders, like, we liked Jaden Daniels. We both said long-term Washington might be the biggest threat to the Eagles in the division, but I can't lie and say I thought Daniels was going to look like not just the Rookie of the Year finalist favorite right now through the first month, but an MVP candidate that's completing over 80% of his balls, and they're 3-1. So you look at Washington, Seattle, of course, Minnesota. I would even say like Arizona looks a lot scrappier than I thought.
Detroit might be the team that, now that I'm thinking about it, like Detroit, they're a really well-coached team.
Yeah.
Jared Goff put together his best performance ever.
100%,
that would be
right. He didn't throw a single incompletion.
No, he didn't. He went 18 for 18, and you can win with guys like that. If the Eagles had to go into Detroit in the playoffs, I think that would be a really tough environment, especially that first game. It's a tough defense, and let's say it's a wild card game. All Jared Goff has to do is really do what he has done and played within the context of the game. And the Eagles, what is their identity? Like a lot of these teams, you can see what their identity is. I don't know if this team has figured it out, but that's the one thing that you look around the league. Has 100% of the teams figured out their identity? I don't think so. I think a lot of teams are still trying to find their footing.
Interesting you mentioned identity. I don't personally care about them finding an on-field identity. I think they need to have one culturally. I think their quarterback and head coach need to have the same vision for this football team and what the same unified message is, and how they go about things needs to be unified. But on the field, like, I don't know, Geno, maybe I'm interpreting identity wrong, but identity to me feels like we're running the football team and that's what we do. Like, I don't want to be put in a box of like, this is what we do, because I want to be able to do everything. Like on defense, I want to be good at man and zone. I want to win with 4, but also blitz at times. On offense, I want to throw when I need to throw and run when I need to run. So when it comes to like identity for on the field, though, I don't care about that as much as I think for the Eagles, they need to be like, they need to have the same vision, I think is kind of the right word for it, at least from my perspective.
And I think a lot of teams go about that identity discussion exactly like we are. Like the Eagles don't want to be pigeonholed into a box, right? Like, you want to be multi-dimensional on both sides of the football. But cultural, why can I not say this word? Man. It's a terrible word. The culture within the building, that's what they need to figure out right now. Because let's look up at Minnesota. Like, what is their identity on the field? I don't really know. I haven't looked.
I think they see themselves as underdogs, right? That's
a good way
their identity.
Yeah,
like, that's what I'm talking about. Like the 2017 Eagles, their identity was their underdogs. That's the kind of identity that I care about. I don't care about we're an air raid offense, so that's what we do. We play spread and throw the ball. Like I don't want to be thrown in a corner from that perspective.
Yeah, I think like what is your identity going to be? Is it going to be we're going to be a bend don't break defense where we just grind games out?
No,
like
see,
is that what we're going to do?
Yeah, I don't want that. Don't say that's what we do, and because Geno, identity scares me because that almost brings stubbornness into it. Like this is what we do, and we're not going to change it. And that feels like you're less willing to be flexible, and that bothers me personally.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, man. And
I just have heard Jalen talk about identity before, so that's why I wanted to bring that up when you mentioned it, because I hope he's talking more about off the field than on the field. But I don't know.
It has to be, and that's really what I mean. Like, you don't want to come into a game and be known as a team that's unprepared and undercoached and undisciplined. Like, that's the type of mentality and identity they need to figure out, right? Like, you don't know who they are. Like, are you a team that is poorly coached? Are you a team that just doesn't have the play? I don't know what this is. Like, going back to the Minnesota example, that's a team that might be understaffed when it comes to personnel, but their coaches are putting these guys in a good enough position, and they know if they take care of the football, they play sound fundamental defense, that they can win football games. And it doesn't have to be pigeonhole yourself into a box, but just know what you are and feel comfortable when you're out there. Sure. It feels like they don't know who they are, and they're in this identity crisis when they're on the football field. And it seems to really kick them in the butt at times. No,
that's a really good point. And I think, like Minnesota, again, Seattle, Washington, Arizona, even Chicago has a really good defense, and Caleb's been getting better the last few weeks. They're 2-2. There's a lot more solid teams in this conference that I thought that will be fighting for a playoff spot. The Saints, I didn't think were going to be as good as they looked the first 2 weeks. Atlanta has 2 really impressive comeback wins against good teams, Philadelphia and Tampa Bay. The Buccaneers were a few plays away from being 4-1, and they went into Detroit and beat them. So there's a lot of teams competing with the Eagles, and it's going to be a dogfight throughout the entire year. But I will say at the same time, like, nobody looks unbeatable, and that's a good sign for the Eagles. San Fran doesn't look like the team of last year. Even Detroit's been up and down so far at 3-1. I will say, though, Geno, like, my final conclusion still on this conference through a month, I do still agree with you that Detroit, and then I would still say San Fran, though, are the teams to beat, like the teams to target. And then it's, like Green Bay, Minnesota, a lot of risers still. But I would still say the two biggest threats to get out of this conference with you are San Fran and Detroit, at least still through September.
And the NFC North, it's going to get scrappy once those teams start playing each other in the winter months. And the NFC East, you're going to have a lot of games where you're just bruised and battered and you try to win this division. I got to say, though, Lou, maybe the biggest surprise, and it's going to be crazy, I think Jonathan Gannon has that Arizona team in a really good spot. And I hate saying that out loud, but they look like a team. That first week they play Buffalo, they almost win that game. They've been scrappy dogs in games like that. That's what I think, Lou. My conclusion, there's a lot more dogs that are going to fight it out than puppies that are cowering in the corner. Like, there aren't those teams that it's like, oh, who's going to have the first round pick or the first overall pick? I don't know if that's going to come from the NFC.
Like the whole NFL, man. Like, even in the AFC, like the Raiders and the Broncos are 2-2. Like, this league right now is on drugs.
Who knows?
Month.
And that's why you got to take it week by week. That's the way you have to look at this league, and you'll get so lost in the sauce, especially being an Eagles fan. It's like, yeah, we have panicked on the show for sure, and that's
it doesn't
what we
negate our long-term concerns. But
right.
For the 2024 season, you have a chance with your talent.
A path.
Because everybody is so Jekyll and Hyde.
Everybody has a chance. You're in the World Series of Poker right now, and the whole room is still full. Like, you haven't kicked anybody out yet.
It doesn't excuse the Eagles' problems, and it bothers me when people on Twitter are saying, well, Mahomes has this, so therefore Hurts. Like, no, just because somebody's turning the football over doesn't mean you should be too.
Just because your neighbor's lawn is long doesn't mean you don't cut your grass.
However, because everybody else is in this similar boat, and you have the talent you do, like, this season is far from over, even for as up and down it's been for the Eagles through the first month. Another thing we've noticed across the league is support systems are so important for quarterbacks, and that got me thinking, Geno, about Jalen Hurts. We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Prize Picks, the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. They put their members first. All withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my pick hits, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. Sign up today, and you can get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineup. So if you're thinking A.J. Brown, when he comes back, is going to get more than, let's say, 83.5 receiving yards, or Saquon Barkley is going to get more than 75 rushing yards, cook up those hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. We thank Prize Picks for sponsoring the Locked On Eagles podcast today. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. A Friday edition of the show, wrapping up the bye week, and then we'll start Browns week on Monday. An important game, Geno. The Eagles, they got to get this one. And the good news is Cleveland's got a ton of talent, but talk about a team that just can't move the football because of their quarterback, and they have Amari Cooper dropping the ball every week. Like, they're a team that's been very disappointing considering their offseason expectations. So, but you can't overlook them. Like, they have a ton of talent. So this is an important game for the Eagles to get to 3-2 and stop the bleeding.
I think this is a team that you go into that home game the first time in a month and you let it be known that we're going to play good football the rest of the way. Because you know what the next week is, Lou? It's a chance at your first divisional game to really kick things into gear. Like, you could go from 2-2 to 4-2 within a couple weeks.
A lot different.
You'll feel so much better. And those are two teams, like you had said, man. That quarterback in Cleveland, not even going to mention his name, dude is dog water. He's not good. He
I was gonna
can't
say,
throw the
please
football.
don't let a bad quarterback look good again.
We might be playing
especially-
Jameis Winston in a week, to be honest with you. Like, he
That's
might
a
get
good point.
benched. So you're going to play one of those guys, then Daniel Jones. If things go awry in those two games, like, we're going to full DEFCON level. Like, it might be completely over, but there's a good chance to feel good. I think those are two games you're going to be down there at that Cleveland game. That's going to be a fun one. And that New York one, get back on track. But looking around the NFL, Lou, the way that a lot of these teams are getting on track is just putting good football players around their young quarterback.
I mean, Deshaun Watson is one of the few players that is not taking advantage of a strong support system where he's had a 2-time Coach of the Year winner and Kevin Stefanski, who has elevated a lot of backup quarterbacks. I mean, look at what Joe Flacco did for Cleveland down the stretch last year. And he's got Amari Cooper for even his struggles this year, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore. Like, that's a pretty good roster on both sides of the ball. But outside of Watson, most other quarterbacks, they're taking advantage of these support systems. Like, it was obvious before. It was a well-known fact that you need to build around your quarterback for them to have success. And we've talked a lot about this with Carson Wentz and Jalen Hurts and how he learned from his mistakes and made sure Jalen had all the personnel in the world and consistently tries to bring in an offensive mind at head coach that can help a quarterback sustain long-term success. But this year especially, we are seeing how important a support system is. I mean, how many throwaway former top picks or just veteran bridge guys suddenly look like, at least early on, franchise quarterbacks. We were talking about Minnesota. Sam Darnold is an early MVP favorite. I mean, Geno Smith in Seattle for the last 3 years might be the most underrated quarterback in the NFL. And you look at even on the other side, look at Malik Willis even winning 2 games in Green Bay. He looked like someone that didn't belong in the league in Tennessee. Then in Green Bay, he looks like suddenly somebody you could start for an entire season. And it's, again, a small sample size, but you look at Bryce Young on the other end of this, like, it really does show how important a support system is. And that's why we continue to talk about, like, yeah, the Eagles have the personnel around Jalen Hurts, but coaching is so important too. Like, Kevin O'Connell probably is going to win Coach of the Year if Sam Darnold continues this, and it's for good reason.
There's a term that it comes to when you're raising a kid, that it takes a village to raise a kid, right? Like, it's not just the parents' job. Like, the grandparents got to be involved, the friends. Like, it takes a lot of minds to help grow the youth for the better. And that's kind of what it feels like for a quarterback. We look at that 2017 year with Carson Wentz. It wasn't just Carson and Doug. It was Howie making a concerned effort to go out and get multiple playmakers that were going to help that offense. They also had Frank Reich in the building. They had John DeFilippo in the building. All of those things were going so well for them. And was that the best offense on paper that this team has ever had? Absolutely not. I look at the quarterback situations now, Lou. I look at Geno Smith. I look at Baker. I look at Sam Darnold. And it's
Baker
like,
too.
Why do we want to give up on Jalen Hurts when these guys have been successful too? Like, that's the thing for me. It's like, why are we trying to let's just tinker some things and it can work out. Like, it can work, folks. You have to have in the NFL, man, the quarterback, you have to take care of it like a different position. Like, yeah, you can hold it to a different level of accountability, but the circumstances in play around the quarterback are so important, are so vastly important. And that's why, yeah, there are concerns with Jalen, and he has to be held accountable. But that 2022 season, when everything was perfect, that's why, getting back to the Wentz idea, like, all these coaches want to fix the quarterbacks, like you had said on the show the other day. You have to build an entire room around one guy. I know this isn't the NBA where it is a one-man league, but you have to build your offense, your coaching staff around your quarterback. And this more than ever, I think it's evident. And I think the best look at it, Lou, might be in Buffalo. Where
with Joe Brady, that's a good point.
You got Joe.
Even Kansas City, Geno, you could say, like, Pat Mahomes doesn't have the receivers right now. Hollywood Brown is down. Rashee Rice is down now, right? Travis Kelce has looked like a shell of who he used to be through 3 of the first 4 games.
And look at how much different it is.
Yeah, so it's almost like, again, having the receivers, the stars, very important. But it's almost like the coach is the most important part. If you can protect your quarterback and you can have a play caller that's with him every single year, That is, and of course you want a quarterback that elevates too, because receivers are going to be different all the time. Personnel will change. There will be times that you have a different coach or a different play caller if a Joe Brady type or Shane Steichen gets promoted, right? Or a Frank Reich. But if you have those like consistent core pieces for your quarterback where you have like one elite target, a good offensive line, and an elite play caller, like that's what you got to do, and that's what the league is doing right now, and it's reviving a lot of guys' careers. And like you said with Jalen, I'm very concerned right now about Jalen. But looking at all these quarterbacks do this in years 6, 7, 8, it's going to make it very difficult for teams to give up on players now that have shown they can do it at least once before. And that's kind of where my head is at too. I'm not willing to give up like I was a few years ago on a quarterback anymore.
And the thing about Jalen, too, that I think gets lost in this discussion is when you're comparing him, he wasn't the number one pick. Like, he was a second-round pick, folks. Like, he was never – the plan was never him to elevate, essentially. Correct. And we had that discussion when you picked him at the time, right? Like, those second-round guys, you kind of want to just win with them. Like, is Sam Darnold winning you games right now? Like, was Malik Willis winning you? You were winning with those guys because everything was in. Maybe that's just who Jalen is, and we just have to find a way to win with him rather than.
But I think he's shown you can win. I think you can win because of him,
right? And that's what I mean. Like guys like Baker, guys like you saw those moments, and then it just takes the right coach and right situation to figure it out. And that's why I'm like, am I ready to move on from Jalen or? But
that's
from
why
Nick?
the league right now and what's happening in quarterback is confirming even more for me that I want a new head coach, because
I feel you there. Yeah. Like the more examples we talk about, like the more we step back and see everything else around it. I mean, dude, look at Jaden. He's got Cliff Kingsbury there and they mesh. Like it's exactly what they needed. He gets it. He plays with swagger. It really just CJ Stroud comes in his first year. Like the situation was perfect. Maybe it does have to be perfect for quarterbacks, man. Like maybe there's 5 guys in the league that elevate and the rest you just win with. Because right now, who are the guys you are winning because of? It's Josh Allen. It's Patrick Mahomes.
Lamar.
I mean, who in the NFC right now? Like all these guys are guys you're winning with. Like the structure is so important. And I know it sounds like we're making excuses, but it takes a village, man. It really does. And going back to 2017, look at what we thought was going to happen in 2018. You lose Frank Reich. He's out the building, right? All of a sudden, you're like, all right, we're just going to elevate somebody in-house. Torrey Smith is no longer here. Oh, we're just going to bring in Mike Williams. Like, maybe that continuity has something to do with success of the players in your building.
And, like, I don't want this to sound like I'm saying you should start settling at quarterback if you have a strong support system, like just bring in guys you can win with. Like, no, for me, you should always try to bring in that franchise quarterback. But you are seeing how important it is, even the stars need that. Like, you can only ask them to elevate so much before it just becomes too much. Yeah, I mean, I think you're really seeing that this year more than ever, and it's really interesting, like the way quarterback has been working this year. So I think it shows me though that maybe preach patience with Hurts, and I think it shows a lot. I think we're seeing the value of a play calling head coach this year.
I think we're learning 2 things.
Or just the right system. Maybe I'm saying play caller is the wrong. Maybe that's wrong because there's a lot of defensive coaches with these quarterbacks. No,
you said it.
You just have to have the right.
That's my last point. I'm pivoting right here. You said it. System. Everybody thinks the idea of a system quarterback is bad. Wrong. You want your guy to be the perfect guy for the system. You want your coach to say, this is my guy, no matter what. I build the ship out of him. There's no other answers. Like, that's what it is. People got on us. I remember last year, Lou, when I brought up the idea of Justin Herbert being the pick for the Dolphins. And everybody was like, no, Tua is the guy for Mike McDaniel's offense. And yeah, that's what it is. Like, you find your guy, you find what he's good at, and you go off of that. There's too much, I think, right now in Philadelphia to kind of wrap this up. What is their identity? What is Jalen's identity? Like, do we know that the guys in the building understand who he truly is as a player? And
he has the weapons. Like, let's not say his support system is not phenomenal. It really is. But
it's the best ever in Philadelphia.
But when it comes to coaching, is that the right fit for Hurts right now? And we've been saying that all week. It's playing a big part in his struggles. So it doesn't excuse it. And, a quarterback has to, again, elevate you as well. But it goes hand in hand. Like this is a direct marriage where you have to have both sides working or it's not going to work long term. It can work short term, but not in the long term for sure. Let's talk a little more Howie Roseman coming up next. We'll wrap the show up by looking back at the 2024 offseason. How has the job Howie did this offseason looked so far through 4 games? We'll get into it coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles.
This episode of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel, which of course is America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get the hunch in the middle of the game, you could check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more right on the same page where you place your bets. The Eagles aren't playing this week, so if you're watching one of those games on NFL Red Zone and you say, I think Josh Allen's going to have an anytime touchdown, we'll go over to FanDuel and bet that. Or you believe one of the big-time wide receivers is going to have a long touchdown, go to FanDuel and bet that. And today, with your first $5 bet, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets. We're talking 40 times your money, guaranteed, when you whip out a single Abraham Lincoln to place a bet. So all you got to do is go to FanDuel.com today to get started.
All right, we're wrapping up this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles, taking a look back at Howie Roseman's 2024 offseason. Geno, through 4 games, it is, I feel like, a mixed bag, right? When you combine his free agency, his job in the draft, I feel like he's had some hits, like big-time hits, players you're winning because of, veterans and rookies, right? Saquon Barkley, Quinyon Mitchell. There's been some solid picks when the jury's still out on them. And then there's been some, it feels like right now, obvious whiffs. But I'm curious to get your thoughts. Like, how would you grade through 4 games the job Howie did in the offseason? Because we were talking about support system. How do you think he put this roster together so far through 4 games? Like, do you think there's more holes than you thought originally or less?
I think some of the concerns are still there. Like, the next guy up at the playmaker positions, like who's going to be the next running back, who's going to be your second tight end, who's going to be that playmaker to step up outside. They have bodies, but they haven't really found anybody special in that regard. But when we're talking about how he did in the draft, the Quinyon Mitchell pick, like when's the last time we've seen a first round pick come in since Devontae and do exactly this, right?
Yeah.
It's been a while, and I think we're going to see the return on Cooper DeJean soon enough, and you'll probably see a little bit more Jalix Hunt. Free agency, that's where it's a mixed bag. He did a great job going to Walmart, seeing that big case of DVDs that says bargain bin on it. He did a great job. Zach Bond, what an unbelievable signing that was.
Mekhi Becton.
I mean, Mekhi Becton, you might have either guaranteed yourself a long-term starter at right guard by picking up a former first-round pick and moving him to that position, or you're essentially going to lock up some sort of compensatory selection because he signs elsewhere next year. When it comes to the big names, Chauncey's still got to get his play there. His culture identity.
That, though.
No. Yeah. Chauncey's going to be fine. I think his main thing is the culture, like bring the dog mentality. He's doing just that. The play isn't as big as you expected, but people were saying, like, they brought up the idea of, like, what if they had Xavier McKinney here? It's like, what if you also paid $6 million?
He's got 4 picks already.
But you also paid him $6 million more at the position. Like, we have to look at.
No, I'm not giving up on Chauncey. He's had some bright spots this year on the field, and he's been
4th down
crucial.
stop, man.
Like the vibes for him, like the leadership has been very important, and I think he will get better as a tackler and when it comes to coverage as well. The pick that looks terrible is Bryce Huff. I mean,
it's bad.
Howie's job pretty much outside of the defensive line looks really good. Obviously, Saquon has been the MVP of this football team.
Oh, yeah. How did we forget about that guy? He's pretty freaking good.
And Howie broke his trend of not investing in that position to make that move, and it's paying dividends. Like, he showed that I'm not stubborn. I'm willing to do things that I have in the past, and it's getting them wins, right? But I think the thing we're seeing so far is that his investments in the defensive line over the last few years and the draft of 2022, 2023, the free agent signing of Bryce Huff, letting Hassan Reddick walk. So far, that position, which normally he's got a very good track record of, it's not the execution. I understood the philosophy of it all. The execution so far does not look great.
The more we get into this one, and we'll see how it plays out because there's plenty of time with edge rushers. Like, you can evolve where he plays and He'll be better in run defending every time he takes more snaps. But this one, my buddy Dom uses this quote. He says, you never want to try and be the smartest guy in the room. And that's what it felt like with the Bryce Huff one, where it's like, can we pay him and Josh Sweat the same that we were going to pay Hassan Reddick? And I always say,
again,
like,
the
salary
mindset
cap
made sense, right?
It did, but the execution, like, maybe he
you're paid
overthought
to
it.
execute. That's the thing, is like, you can't always excuse a move because of the philosophical idea behind it.
Yeah.
You have to execute. You are paid to execute. So if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter.
It's not Plato and Marcus Aurelius. Like, you don't get paid for your philosophy.
No.
You get paid for how it works out on the football
So what's he
field.
batting, like shooting 50%? Because I think Bond has been a hit so far. For what he was supposed to be, he has exceeded expectations. And I think even Nakobe Dean, like, is better this year than I thought he was going to be. There was a time this summer I said, whoa, is Jeremiah Trotter Jr. going to start, or is Devin White going to be that guy? But neither one is, like, they need still that every down, like, legit coverage linebacker. I feel like they have two really solid number twos at linebacker, but they don't have a true alpha. But Bond was supposed to be that, if not less, and I think that was a hit. Becton was a hit. Saquon was a hit. Quinyon was a hit. We haven't really seen any other rookies play much, so the jury's out on them. I would say the obvious misses are, right now, Bryce Huff, Jahan Dotson for a third-round pick. That move doesn't look great. I don't want to blame Dotson, but the move so far does not look good. Like, the game you didn't have.
Say
that again?
I got to say something on the Jahan Dotson topic.
Yeah, sure.
Robert Quinn, Golden Tate, Jahan Dotson, maybe Howie Roseman needs to stop trading guys in a short-sighted manner. He needs to think more long-term because he's gotten himself in trouble in this regard. Robert Quinn did nothing. Yeah, you needed an edge rusher, but he did nothing for
Kevin
you.
Byard.
Yeah, Kevin Byard, the same thing. You needed
Jannard Avery.
You see what I'm saying? Like, that's the one area where maybe he just has to take a step back and say, okay.
Is Chauncey the only move like that worked? Probably.
Yeah. In the last couple years.
And I would say Bradbury, too.
Well, Bradbury was a free agent. He wasn't really like a trade where it was like, I need to go and get him.
Right.
Like Chauncey, you gave up multiple late-round picks.
Yeah, Chauncey, and then you'd have to go back 7 years to Jay Ajayi.
The Ajayi one is just about it. The only one that really has worked, man. So maybe you take into consideration these long-term moves, like the Saquon move. Beautiful move, right? The Bryce Huff one, not so much. But long-term, they both made sense. These short-term runs, like Jahan Dotson, is he really even guaranteed to be in Philadelphia if he doesn't continue to produce past this?
That's a high pick to give up, too.
It is.
I understood the mindset. I'm a big Dotson guy. He was a former first-round pick, and then you suddenly had no holes in this offense. But a 3 for that is, now it feels like a lot.
It does. And the thing about Howie is he still gets these picks back, and we weren't dying to get that Golden Tate pick back and the Robert Quinn one. But at the same time, that brings down his batting average. Like, we still have to hold him accountable for some of those moves. Maybe being the smartest guy in the room sometimes isn't the best thing. Maybe it's like, what if we did just pay Hassan Reddick his $20+ million and we could have came back to a decent number?
For me, that was what I was calling for.
That is the move where it's like, everybody in the NFL sees it. He's not playing in New York.
Normally, he went against his philosophy twice, and it worked once with running back paying Saquon. But normally, Howie does not go cheap when it comes to the trenches on either side.
Exactly.
He normally 10 times out of 10 would pay a elite in his prime pass rusher, and he didn't this time, and it hurt him. So maybe he learned that lesson and says, okay, never again. Like, I'm not going to go cheap at this position. I don't know. But it's overall, I would still say, like, Howie, I think he's a big part of the problem so far this year, but it's not because of, like, moves he made on the roster. Like, he's had some misses, Geno, but I don't think any of them, like, outside of Huff, he's going to pay for dearly long term. No. The problem with Howie is, again, the Lurie Howie coaching philosophy power thing. That's where his hands are more on the state of the team currently, but I don't think he did anything this past offseason where it's like, oh my God, they don't have enough talent here, and it's just like how he put us in this hole. I don't really feel that way about it, even with his misses.
Right, because the Saquon one, that's like a 5Xer. Like, you can just put so much more into the stock of him. And the Bryce Huff thing, it kind of gets extrapolated because none of the other guys are doing anything either. So that kind of hurts you as well. Howie
The defensive
Roseman,
line, though, I guess we can blame him. The defensive line is really, really bad, and they're all from his top draft classes and a big free agent signing. So
I said they're really good in being proactive in a lot of areas, but the defensive line is one where they've been a little bit more reactive, and that was tough because for years, like the Javon Hargrave move was so ahead of its time when he made that signing, and now it's like, when is that next move? Like, when is the Hassan Reddick move coming? Like that was ahead of its time too. Yeah, and they missed out this time, and maybe it does come back to bite them, but you're still very early on.
When you think about it, I guess Huff kind of is in line with what Howie does, because Reddick was a similar signing. He was like an underrated pass rusher that didn't cost $20+ million. So again, it's less about the philosophy for me. The Jordan Davis pick, the Nolan Smith pick, the Bryce Huff signing, it all makes sense when you try to make it out logically in your head. But again, you are paid to execute. Like, me and you are not. He is paid to execute, especially at an important unit like that. He's got to be better in that way, or else if this doesn't get fixed this year, they're going to have to go heavy on the trenches in the draft and in free agency next year.
Howie Roseman is not going to get fired, and I don't think we want to be in a world where he is fired.
I don't think he does. He shouldn't be fired for any move he did or didn't make this offseason. Like in the defensive line, Geno, he has if this was linebacker or the secondary, it's like, yep, this is what he does. He always misses here. It would be different. But this is the first time in a long time he has missed this badly on either side of the line, right?
I trust him. I still trust him, and
in that way, in the trenches, I do too.
So. The AJ move, paying a lot of your young offensive linemen, those selection to get Landon, to get Camp, like you have to give him credit.
He's done a great job with the offense.
Yeah, and he's always a guy that can kind of get his way out of crap situations, man. Like ever since Byron Maxwell, Kiko Alonso, you got to kind of trust him to figure things out. But I will say, when it is this panic mode, short-sightedness, I'm starting to watch these a little bit more. Because
and notice it's always on one side of the football, Gino. But I do,
good
again,
point.
But that's why it's hard to hate him for what's happened this year, because he finally did say, no, I'm going to go long-term on the defensive line and find young players and give my draft picks chances. Like, he didn't bring in a lot of Band-Aids on defense. Yeah. So, but you're right. I mean, that's sometimes when it bites him, and I just think overall the execution hasn't been great. The philosophy normally is, but overall he's got to execute a lot better at some important spots. But there's still plenty of time. Bryce Huff can still turn it around this year, and so can this entire team. They've got the Browns coming up next as a way to bounce back to get to 3-2 next week. We'll get you covered for that game all week long, Monday through Friday. Thanks as always for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. For Geno Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thanks for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.